Welcome, patrons. I think it's time we wrapped up the Elven God series, and no better god to end it with than Mythal herself. She's easily the most talked about goddess in the entire series, so we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's get into Mythal, the All-Mother and the Protector. The myth. To the Dalish, Mythal is known as the Protector, the All-Mother, and the Goddess of Justice and the Moon. Now, side note that the wiki notes that she's also the goddess of love, but the source on that is just that there is a tale where a dude prayed to Mythal for love, and I don't really buy this line of thinking in which if someone prays to her for something, that means she's the elven goddess of that thing. So, I don't think that's necessarily true. Anyway, now she is one of the few elven pantheon in which we have an origin story for. As the tale goes, after Elgonon fought his father, the sun, and buried him in the ground, his mother, the earth, tried to plead with her son to let him go as life was dying. Elgonon's pride was too great and his vengeance too terrible, so he refused, and the earth began to cry, creating an ocean. Mythal then came out of that ocean and touched Elgonon's brow. His fury calmed, and then he freed the sun, and together the two brought back life on the planet. And that night, after the sun had gone to sleep, she gathered the glowing earth that had held the sun, and threw it into the sky to make the moon, a pale reflection of the sun's glory. Other legends paint Mythal as the mother of most of the other gods, namely Falindin, Dirthamin, and Drul Solas and Janae. Now, Janae is a bit debatable as he flip-flops between husband and brother to Solas, so, maybe it's both true, I just hope it isn't. But no matter the story and relationship, Mythal, with Elgonon, led the Elven pantheon. The Dalish mainly pray to Mythal for protection, and as Meryl says, it's not wise to ignore her or her shrines. Now there's also a Dalish bedtime song about Mythal that goes like this. Irsa telnal, Mythal asma theneras, Irsana emma, him solis evanuris, da dergenlin, banal manas elgara, belinaris, belinaris. Or, roughly translated, I am empty, filled with nothing. Mythal gives you dreams. It fills you, within you, making our leaders proud. My little stones, never years the sun, forever, forever. Her symbols are mainly that of a dragon, the moon, and a leafless tree. Now in Dragon Age Origins, there is also a shield that uses a mask made of leaves as her symbol, although in later games this has been used to represent the Dalish as a whole and not necessarily just Mythal, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's not her either. Now, keeper staves are supposed to be cut from a Dal a Mythal, or Tree of Mythal. These trees are highly respected and don't normally thrive in human settlements. When a first replaces their keeper, they are given a staff from this wood. A frequent Dalish saying is Mythal Anas, which means Mythal favor and is used as a type of blessing. There are scholars that believe that the constellation Salantir, which depicts a dragon, and usually associated with Dumat, originally belonged to Mythal. And that's actually it. There really isn't that much on the worship of Mythal, and the myth of her is actually more like the reality of it, which is kind of a weird flip-flop in this series. The reality. Our first look on who Mythal really was starts off with the quest What Pride Has Wrought in Dragon Age Inquisition and actually doesn't stop until Trespasser. The Temple of Mythal itself has just a ton of stuff going on, so in an interest to not get caught up in details that don't actually focus on Mythal, just know that this wasn't the only one of its kind, and that in the time of Arlathan it once held a thriving city dedicated to Mythal, and that the Well of Sorrows might not have been unique to Mythal herself. Which, on the well, as we understand it, the purpose was to collect knowledge in one place, and then those who drank from the well were able to be controlled by Mythal. If you have an Inquisitor who has a magic perk unlock, you can actually know a bit more about it, but again, too much to talk about, and we'll have to get to it another day. As we currently understand it per Solas, Elvenon was ruled by powerful mages turned warlords who saved the elven people during a terrible war. As they were immortal, their reputation went from generals to kings to gods over time, and they all owned slaves. Mythal was the best of them. Note that Solas doesn't say she was a good person, she was just the best of what we so far know to be a terrible lot and seemed to actually really care for her people. From here we have a lot of bits and pieces, and while many like to connect them in certain ways, I just don't feel comfortable piecing together information and saying what is honestly a theory as lore, even if it has a lot to back it up. So for your pleasure, bits of facts we know, which keep in mind are mostly skewed to her favor, as they are quoted in places that worshipped her. During the time of Arlathan, the people would go to Mythal when one was wrong to seek justice, as Elgonon was too angry. Elgonon was actually okay with this deal as he saw her wisdom. Some people would seek justice but were lying, to which she wasn't having any of that. To those who sought true justice, she harried their enemies until the end of their days. When an argument started between Elgar'nan and Thaladin, she was able to haggle a duel between champions rather than a full-scale war, and likely saved many lives. As per Song de Soleil's, Mythal had more than one city, and Soleil's temples rivaled them. When Thaladin started a campaign to get more worshippers, no matter the cost, Mythal rallied the other gods against him until he submitted. When Indrul started to show signs of madness, Mythal was the one to take action when the other gods were fearful of her. She started a rumor that a giant serpent at the base of the mountain was causing chaos, and when the hunter came to kill the beast, she attacked Indrul. They fought for 3 days and nights or whatever, but her magic sapped Indrul's strength and stole her knowledge. Indrul was never able to return to the abyss, and peace returned. She had some sort of knowledge of what Fenrir was up to, at least enough to know a secret greeting between him and his followers. And the Inquisitor that has drunk from the Well of Sorrows knows that they may have been close to one another. She struck down the Pillars of the Earth, which we assume to be Titans, and it is heavy-handed as Titans, so I think it's Titans. But anyway, somehow this memory also connects them with a strange burst of magic that the elves tried to seal away, with another memory saying that the Evanuris, not just Mythal, unleashed something in their greed. In the bedtime story mentioned above, the writer of the codex in which it was found notes that it could be that the original lyrics talk about dwarves rather than little stones. This was found in the Lyrium Processing Center in the Deep Roads, and they wonder what Mythal actually did in the Deep Roads and why she needed lyrium. Now, she isn't actually locked away like the other gods, but instead was murdered by someone who destroyed her temple and betrayed her specifically. However, we know that the betrayer isn't Fenrir, but is part of the Evanuris, and they did so in their lust for power. We're not actually quite sure if it was just one of the Evanuris or if it was all of them. However, as we know, she isn't dead. A wisp of her former self would find its way to Flemeth. Where it was before then is unknown. Now let's also talk about Solas for a moment, because the two had some sort of connection. In the Lyrium Processing Center that seemed to belong to her, his statues were placed in a position of guarding, not so much honor or worship. While this position is actually seen at other temples, it's called attention to in Mythals. At the end of the main game, there is also their interaction. Flemeth and Solas embrace, and this is honestly the most emotionally open we have seen him in this entire series so far, even in a romance. While we are not sure of the nature of this relationship, whether romantic or platonic, we know at least they were pretty close. Flemeth and the Witches. Flemeth herself deserves her own video, so I'm not going to go too deep into detail here, but during the events of Inquisition, we learn that Flemeth is the host to a fragment of Mythal. Together, the two have created some sort of plan, and at this point, all we really know of it is that there will be some sort of reckoning. Now, a big question you might have now is, where is Mythal? As you all know, Flemeth seemed to eat it at the end of Inquisition, so what happened to Mythal's wisp? Now here's where we venture into theory, but a major theory in the fandom is that Solas has taken it. Now while at face value it does honestly seem this way, I would like to point out one very important data mined note. This is Flemma from the previous 2 games. In this game, Flemma's story comes to a head. She knew that Solas would summon her and that he would need to steal her power to further his plans. She knew that because they are both elven gods, yet Solas has slept for 1,000 years and his power dwindled, while she was killed long ago and a spark escaped from her into the body she now holds. She has nurtured that spark and knew that Solas would need it. He was once her oldest friend, but she knows that in his drive to save the elven people, he will kill anyone, even her. She intends to let him have the power so long as she can pass the essence of her godhood onto Morrigan, a gift that Flemeth had always planned for her daughter, yet one Morrigan misunderstood as hostile possession. Now, I do think it's actually important to talk about data mine notes real quick, because every time we talk about them, someone is confused. In the data of just a lot of games, there is a lot of fluff information that has stuck around from the game's creation. The place where we tend to get the most information in Dragon Age are notes written about what scenes are supposed to be and helpful direction for voice actors. Information like this has been around since the first game, but it should be noted that these things are not always canon. Things in development change. For example, in Dragon Age Origins, it has a bunch of ages listed for the companions that actually make no sense with the reality of the game and the lore. So it's totally possible that this data mine note was the intent at the time, but it will be changed in the future. However, with that intent, things do fall in place with Morrigan. I talk about it more in Morrigan's video, but she has been set up to be the next host of Mythal. Kieran calls her the inheritor. Ivana talks about a gift she will inherit. Her quest for Dragon Age origins just suddenly makes a lot more sense. I mean, it made sense at the time, but I'm like, now there's like, you can see it in a new way, whatever. I think a time is coming when Morrigan and Mythal might be the same person. Further, I think that this thing that Mythal is doing to the Alluvian is shoving Mythal's fragment into it. This is the same magical effect as when Flemeth takes the piece of the old god's soul from Kieran, and this happens no matter what Kieran's fate is. This tied with the dad in my note, I think Solas took her power, but not the actual god fragment, so my assumption is that he cannot actually control the well either. Which, what does that mean for Mythal? I think this means that Mythal is currently a wisp again and awaiting Morrigan, and I would think that a likely plot point down the line is us helping Morrigan complete her fate as a host of Mythal. The theory. So there are actually a ton of theories revolving around Mythal, and I actually just went over one of them. Sections are vague, I don't know. So we're going to go over just a quick pass by some of these, and I'll have to get to some of them later on, specifically the Andraste one. So an overarching one that connects like so many of these together is that Solas and Mythal were lovers. However, she was also married to Elgernon. Mythal was then killed and then looked for a new host, to which history started to repeat itself in women with similar stories as Mythal. Mythal took root in Andraste. She helped bring the Imperium down in the south, took on a lover in Shartan, which that's actually a theory in lore as well, although considered scandalous. But Andraste was then betrayed by her husband, Mathroth. The Wisp then moved on to Flemeth, who was wounded and dying, calling out in the dark for vengeance as her husband had killed her lover and then tried to kill her. Some also like to include Tyrda Brightaxe, the mother of the Avar. I'm probably pronouncing that bad again. I'm sorry. But Tyrda was connected to the Lady of the Skies. Tyrda did have a female elven lover, however she didn't actually have a traitorous husband. In the stories of her, she did have a suitor that tried to kill her tribe, and she did have a child with another dwarven man, but she doesn't quite fit into this repeating history theory, although she or the lover might still have been a host. This then does bring into question Morrigan as the inheritor of Mythal. If history were to repeat itself, would a romance warden be the husband or the lover in this story? Would players be okay with their waifu getting married for political reasons for the sake of the story, or is Morrigan going to be the one to break the cycle? Now, on this theory, I mentioned previously in this series, but a lot of fandom stuff likes to paint Mythal as the wife of Elgernon. This isn't actually stated in the lore. In the lore, Mythal is called a mother figure, and Elgernon is called a father figure, and all the gods minus Gillenon are called their children at least once. But we don't know if they are biological children or if Elgernon is actually the father. He might have only sired the children, but there were actually no romantic relationships. There's a lot of options here. Now, that being said, the way the gods' origin stories are to the Dalish, namely that of Dirthaman and Faladin, it is implied that at least those two are biologically Mythals and Elgernons. That's how it can, that's how I read it at least. However, this could also just be the Dalish interpretation, which could be wrong. The only stated connection that Mythal and Elgernon have is that she can calm his rage, and they might technically be half-siblings because she was born out of his mother's tears. This whole family is messed up. Let's just be honest. Now, I sort of glossed over this a bit earlier, but Mythal is also connected to the Lady of the Skies in Avar lore. In general, there is a belief among fans that the Avar lore is made up of bits and pieces of elven and maybe even old god history, as some bits seem to line up with other stories from other beliefs. Many of the stories involving the Lady of the Skies seem to connect with stories of Mythal. Another common theory is that Mythal isn't actually justice, but vengeance. This is mostly based on Anders, sort of, assuming that Mythal was once the spirit of justice and she twisted into vengeance. But there's actually a lot more solid proof for this that I don't see that often. Something that I noticed a lot in my research for this video was that Dragon Age Origin era material connected Mythal and vengeance a lot. And by that I mean they actually translate Mythal as vengeance. I first came across this in the Dragon Age RPG, where one of the pre-written stories is about a Dalish man who is possessed and takes the name Mythalan, which is translated as Child of Vengeance. While the DA RPG is a good source of backup lore, and by that I mean a good resource to use when there isn't anything anywhere else, it can always, and has, been overruled by game canon. This isn't written by the core group, but rather the makers of the RPG. However, they are able to access BioWare and get their blessing, although that doesn't necessarily mean that there hasn't been a ton of mistakes in the past, and believe me, there has been a ton of mistakes in the past. Remember when I talked about the data mine notes? Well, in Dragon Age Origins voiceover notes, it actually states that Mythal is the goddess of vengeance. Now, many of you are probably going to quote the Dragon Age wiki at me, which sources Nan as the elven term for vengeance. I actually mentioned this in the Elgranon video, but the source for that trivia is the Elgranon God of Vengeance Codex, which assumes that the title is the translation, and I'm highly doubtful of that because that's not the case in any of the other God Codex entries. So if you couple all of this with Flemeth's talk about her plan with Mythal...
Why did Mythal come to you?
For a reckoning that will shake the very heavens.
And you follow her whims? Do you even know what she truly is?
You seek to preserve the powers that were, but to what end? It is because I taught you, girl. Because things happened that were never meant to happen. She was betrayed as I was betrayed, as the world was betrayed. Mythal clawed and crawled her way through the ages to me, and I will see her avenged!
I'm kind of wondering if Mythal ever was the goddess of justice, and perhaps she was vengeance this whole time. Now, this does bring to question what Elgranon is, as that was sort of his whole identity. But does that not echo Mythal's theorized hosts? A woman who overshadowed her rageful husband and was murdered for having the gall to be better than a man? And that, dear patrons, is all that I have on Mythal. Do you still have lingering questions, proof that I'm wrong, comments about your own fan theory? Feel free to tweet me at @Gildathon on Twitter or send a PM to user Gillanon on Reddit. The rest are all.